Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Ransomware, where the rubber meets the road. I'm Jeff Barker. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing with Illusive. I'm joined by Tim Nursel. I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have to step away or you want to share it with some colleagues, we'll be sending it out within the next 24 hours or so. So you can leverage it for whatever purpose you want. And so, you know, one of the things that we really wanted to do here is not do the typical webinar, right? We've all been on Zoom for a long time, and we wanted to do something a little different and dive deep into technology and really show you hands-on kind of what Illusive does for ransomware and how our solution stacks up and where it fits in the overall solution set for ransomware. So we'll be bouncing back and forth, Tim and myself. He'll be showing you real technology, so trying to flip things around a bit and not spend 80% of the time on slides and 20% on product, but actually do the exact opposite. So if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. We'll try and answer questions during the webinar, right, as they come up, and we'll try to deal with them. So really trying to do things a little differently here and really help you understand kind of what Illusive does and how we help you with ransomware. Tim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Jeff. So my name's Tim Nursel. I'm the sales engineering lead for Northern Europe, so part of the sales engineering or field engineering, whatever we want to call it, organization. As Jeff said, we'd really like to show you some stuff today and go through how Illusive can help with ransomware, but also talk a bit about how ransomware works, what it is, why it's different, why it's not different. And again, as Jeff said, I'd love to hear some questions and keep it engaging. As you'll hear from Jeff and I, it's almost Illusive unplugged. We just want to go through a few things, but really explain what it is that we're thinking, and love to know your thoughts on that as well.
Okay, let's jump into it, Tim. Tim, we kind of named where the rubber meets the road. Tim's the rubber meets the road, and I guess me, the marketing guy, I'm kind of where the rubber meets the sky. So we'll try to provide a good balance here. Our agenda quickly, we'll talk about different types of ransomware really quickly, the phases, kind of major phases, breach, lateral movement, leak and lock, common families and TTPs, hygiene best practices, what we can do for lateral movement and gaining timely visibility into ransomware activities, talk about some active defense techniques, and then a process for reducing ransomware risk. So that's kind of what we're gonna talk about today. Tim, you want to jump ahead? So first, to level set everybody, I think it's helpful to understand kind of what part of ransomware, what type of ransomware we're talking about. We started with the ransomware journey years ago with WannaCry and NotPetya, kind of spray and pray, and it's really evolved into these ransomware as a service and ransomware families, and really focused on human operated ransomware. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the human operated part, where we saw APT techniques combined with ransomware, where there's an attacker at the wheel and they're kind of navigating your environment, moving laterally and performing reconnaissance in real time. So that's going to be the focus of today's discussion.
And yeah. Jeff, from the diagram that we've got here, would you say these boxes are about the right size from other people you're talking to in the industry, that the vast majority of what we got is human operated ransomware now? I'm certainly seeing that ransomware as a service is making this so much cheaper that most of what we are seeing is more of that human operated.
Yeah, I definitely, that's what's in the news. That's where the money's being made right now. Attackers are, these ransomware families, they're monetizing ransomware, with Bitcoin and the like. So kind of this is the focus. I think this is the real high risk area for organizations. So, if you look at a human operated ransomware attack, right, there's kind of three phases we'll talk about. And we'll really, in this session, zero in on the lateral movement part. But certainly a beachhead has to be established. There's a lot of things you need to do in your environment, in your security stack, to ensure that, you're not an easy target for beachhead establishment. But, the reality is it happens all the time. It happens to the best. And then you get to that next phase of they have a persistent presence in your environment, and the attacker needs to move laterally. And there are tools that they're using and techniques that they're using that are common across these different ransomware families and attack types. And we'll talk about those. And that's kind of the key area. If you were to say, hey, Jeff, what are you guys really going to talk about today? Well, we believe the place where most organizations are most exposed is in the lateral movement, that living off the land process. And then ultimately there's that leak and lock process where, the damage is done. So, but we're really going to zero in on that middle section.
Fantastic. To me, as an ex-pen tester, as an ex-red teamer, as all of this looks similar to what we've been doing for a while. And I think we can all agree there's no silver bullet for ransomware.
Definitely.
It kind of surprises me that you see companies out there who say, we are a ransomware company, when this feels like traditional attacks and we just happen to have this encryption part at the end. And even, I suppose, coming to you as the marketing guy, if you want to refer to yourself as that, Jeff, this is being acted as a new problem. We need something new in the security stack, or it feels like industry and marketing are pushing us that way. But are these not similar challenges that we've had for years? I mean, what is it that I'm missing here?
No, I think you're right on, right? We've faced these challenges for years, right? APT is not a new phenomenon. What we've seen right now is combining APT techniques with a real opportunity to monetize these attacks, right? This is about money. That's what this is about. And with Bitcoin and the like out there, it really makes it much easier for the attackers to monetize this. But as the marketing guy, I'd love to come and tell everybody, hey, we're the solution. But there is no single solution. There's no silver bullet. There's no kind of new addition to the stack that's going to make this problem go away. I mean, we've been marketing that for a long time, and it's almost never been true, and it's not true today. So there's a list of things you have to do. But we believe that this lateral movement and human operated lateral movement is something that organizations aren't as well prepared for. And that's what we'll focus on.
Absolutely. And I think we see that even in competitive sessions for people who are looking at just a ransomware company, when there's no substance underneath, and it's I solved this tiny little problem, but not the underlying issues, some of the things that we look at and hear, where we can see that lateral movement and the MITRE ATT&CK 6 to 9 is actually just as important potentially as the lock and leak fit piece. It's just, that's the bit that they ask for the money from.
Yeah. Cool. So jump ahead. So, we're not going to spend really any time here. Like I said, the focus is, on that front part. But it's interesting to point out, there are some primary attack vectors for establishing beachhead, publicly accessible RDP servers, phishing, and software vulnerabilities. So those are kind of the beachheads there. We're seeing some techniques that attackers are using to bypass some security controls on the endpoint. We started to really see this documented in the SolarWinds attack, and we see that continue. You can go to, GitHub and download, red team code that gives you, ways to do that. So, that beachhead is real, and that's why we talk about, assume compromise and be prepared for it.
Absolutely.
So go ahead and kind of move on. We'll, really focus in now on the lateral movement, part. This kind of, the attacker establishes a presence, right? And this is happening to everybody. We can look back at the nation state attacks that we saw with the SolarWinds attack and say some of the best and most sophisticated organizations, the attacker was persistent in the environment and moving around and performing lateral reconnaissance for a significant period of time, right? This is affecting all of us. And I think that's, to me, that's the affirmation that this lateral movement is an area that we as an industry need to focus in on. And, we're seeing a lot of common tools being used across the different attack types.
Awesome. And this lateral movement piece, I talked to a number of clients who, or prospects that are sort of new to lateral movement. They understood that it was part of the kill chain, but even some breach attack simulation tools, they just presume that lateral movement is doable. Yeah. So we are starting to see a number of people jump on this bandwagon of lateral movement almost. And there's an awful lot of free, as in free lunch, security assessments out there. I suppose, are these really free? Does this feel like free lunch where actually you're still paying for it in some way? There seems to be a lot of them out there. How do you differentiate these?
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. Everybody's got an assessment. They're all free. The reality is, and let's be honest, when you go in and you help, a customer perform an assessment, they've got to spend time on it, right? You're going to need things. So nothing's free. I think it's important to focus but the assessments can be valuable. So you just got to evaluate, what do I think my risk here is? And then spend time on those assessments that map to your high risk areas. If you believe lateral movement and you're not well covered there, then spend some time there. But, there's a lot of free assessments, and I'll be the first one to tell you they're not free. They take time for everyone. So, and time is money. Tim, kind of back at you, I was thinking about the previous slide and the kind of the different ways that the different mechanisms for establishing a beachhead. We read, around like Hafnium and the Microsoft Exchange attacks that 3 vulnerabilities were published. And within 5 to 15 minutes, attackers were scanning. It seems to me we're not patching that fast. I mean, what does that tell you about our reality there?
I think what it really tells you is patching isn't working. For anyone out there, patching isn't working. And you can try and do that as fast as you want to. You can say that you're going to patch 5 minutes after the latest 0-day, regardless of business impact, and you're still going to be vulnerable to being breached for that 5 minutes. So I think this is why we're starting to see people more and more take the assumed breach stance. And it's something that I think some of our people who really care about information security are doing, and saying, you know what, someone's going to get in, whether it's going to be a 0-day or a -1 day, whereby it's not actually known to anybody yet. We have to take that assumed breach. I mean, if we go and think about how those beachheads are being actually created, nearly 20% were software vulnerabilities, which gives us almost 80% of it's not a vulnerability. Someone's getting in through phishing or RDP servers. So patching was great for us to think of, and still something that should be part of the cyber hygiene, but we've got to have other things in place that are going to stop people that are living off the land, or where you've got that half an hour of patching, or I think we're being kind if we say half an hour. For most people, it's more like a year's worth of not patching out there.
Right.
There's got to be other things that we've got in place that are going to detect that and stop that lateral movement as well.
Right. All right, let's keep rolling. The kind of real message here is that, if we look at all the different ransomware families, there are consistent TTPs that span all of these, right? So if we think about our lateral movement and how we responding to one of these and making it more difficult for the attacker to harvest credentials, dumping LSAS and running it through Mimikatz or Lazan or what have you, will help us in all these areas. So So, the message for me here is, hey, there's not, I don't have to deal with every single ransomware family differently, and I don't have to have a strategy for each ransomware family that's unique. If we have an answer for these things, then I'm in a lot better shape.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So I mean, Tim, it's funny as I look at these tools, and a lot of these things really started as red team tools, and we haven't as an industry had a real good record against red teams. The blue teams haven't, right? And so, I mean, if the attackers are using our red team tools to break in, and we were failing against our red team, isn't this the kind of canary in the coal mine? Shouldn't our red team engagements shouldn't we take them more seriously that we're not doing well?
Oh, absolutely. And it really, I'm always surprised when we hear this as a sophisticated attack, or this was whatever. We've never seen this kind of thing before. And you dig deep into it, and okay, what did they use? And they used Cobalt Strike, and they used credentials harvesting, and they used SMB. And when we were sort of putting this together and kind of thinking, okay, what are these TTPs? I went back to some of my training manuals from over 10 years ago, and that was just basic pen testing. And do you know what they were teaching? They were teaching you how you could bypass EPP, how you can move throughout the network with SMB, how to credential harvest, how we can then, well, it was Metasploit at the time because PowerShell endpoint power hadn't been released. But this is what we were teaching, basic red teaming and basic pen testing 15 years ago. And right. These are still things that have just been taken by threat actors and ransomware crews. And why are we surprised when we lose to the red team every year, and then an unprecedented, sophisticated attack does something half as clever and manages to breach your defenses? It's right. We've already told you, we already know these things are going to happen. So why are we surprised?
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah. So let's keep rolling so we can kind of dive into the technology, and we'll start to do that here. I think one of the things that we're learning and we've seen is attackers are leveraging our hygiene deficiencies and kind of information that we're harvesting from our customers. 1 in 5 endpoints cache privileged credentials. 37% of endpoints contain unnecessary identity and connection information. When we leave this residue on our endpoints and we're not exercising the right hygiene around our identities and our connection information, we're making it way too easy on the attacker. And so kind of one of the things that Tim will kind of walk through now is, let's look at this in action. What are the things that organizations can do? How can we continuously kind of remove those those credentials and connection and pathway information that the attackers are leveraging? We're making it too easy on them, don't you think?
Absolutely. And when we're talking about assessments, if people want to go and run some like really easy assessments on their own to figure, have they got vulnerable connections and credentials? There are some free tools out there, sysadmin tools like Web Browser Pass View, which is just going to tell you, have you got credentials stored in your browser? Have you got saved RDP connections? And just seeing that, I mean, that's only a tiny bit of what we can start to do within Illusive, but that's going to start telling you whether you're vulnerable to lateral movement. And if you make that into something bigger, you're probably going to end up with something which is going to be a map more like this. And this is some fantastic information that we can take out of the product, and something fantastic that we can put onto networks to show you, hey, where does the rubber hit the road? We've got to say that at least 15 times, seeing as it's the name of the webinar. Where can we actually see these connections and credentials? And not just a sort of, hey, maybe theoretically with ACLs and ACEs, I could move around here, but really, let's draw it out. And can we see networks that shouldn't be connected? We've got connections where there is from cardholder data environments back into internal networks. And from Illusive, we've actually pulled some of that stuff out previously and shown people that, hey, you had the best firewall rules in the world, but actually there was an egress rule that meant that someone could get back out or someone could get to the cloud. And this means that you haven't got the protections in place that you want to have. What we can do from Illusive as well, when we're talking about those vulnerable connections and credentials and the pathways between them all, is actually start to draw that out for your crown jewels. And crown jewels is it's really one of the elusive words that we use, and we know that IT asset management is difficult. And the first thing that you probably want to do with IT asset management is which machines do you care about? And then putting that into Illusive or putting that into something to say, okay, I need protections around that. Also having a tool, having some software that can tell you where are your crown jewels based on, again, what's really happening in your network. If half the network is connecting to a file server and that's got sensitive files on, you're probably going to say that that's going to be something that's a crown jewel and want to put protections in place. And what Illusive does allow you to do through some of these audits and assessments is build out this attacker view, meaning that we can show where are these connections into the network. And from a domain controller, which is the easiest crown jewel for anyone to say, hey, that's something I need to protect, we can start to draw these pathways out there. And if we were doing this actually where we could see everyone, I'd say hands up, who's ever RDP'd into a machine and just disconnected it, not logged it out properly. And later versions of Windows don't really give you the option. It makes it a lot more difficult. Do you realize that while you're still logged into that, your credentials are in memory? And somebody, if they gained access to that machine, could start moving around. And that's how maps like this appear. That's how we end up with credentials and connections all over the network. And this isn't sysadmins being bad. This is people being tasked with availability. And that's great. That's what we want from IT. But we security teams, we need to make sure we can put protections in place and not only draw out maps like this to say, this is where connections and credentials are, but also have ability to automatically clean some of this out. And as you see from Illusive here, we can go and we can clean that out and remove some of that residual risk. It's not necessarily against policy, but it is things that we want to remove. And you see that when the network still is administered in the same way, people can still access file servers and file shares, but we end up with that 1 in 5 endpoints with cache credentials has been cleaned, and that 37% of endpoints that did contain unnecessary identity and connection information, we can now clear that out and make that lateral movement risk so much less.
Tim, is this view, do you have to build this yourself or is this built for you?
That's a great question. So this all gets built automatically from Illusive, and this is built automatically without agents installed on boxes. And this will automatically get updated as well when you can go and rebuild this and say, okay, I think I've done something in the network, go and rebuild this. There is so much from Illusive, which is about saving time, not taking more time. We all know that we get too many tickets every day and we have too many assessment tools and we've got too many audit tools, and we didn't want to be another one of those. And that's why our solution is about reducing this time. So this is automatically created and can automatically clean this up as well.
Yeah, so when you hit that clean button, I saw a bunch of the lines between the nodes disappear, right? Is that a byproduct of doing that?
So that's what happened there. And then it's a demo environment, so sure. It works much better when I click clean now, because if I'd have started on this screen and said, look at this super clean environment, now everybody trusts me that I've already cleaned this up before we got here. Smoke and mirrors is not something that we like to do at Illusive. We like to be able to show it. So that absolutely was what happened there. We pushed out and we removed those connections and credentials and reduced that risk.
Yeah, so that's some of the hygiene work that Illusive can provide and kind of keeping our environment clean and making it a little more difficult for the attackers. You can think about it as you're kind of reducing the attack surface by eliminating that, right? And we'll talk about some of the next steps, but I think there's a ton of value in just running that process continuously. I talked to a CISO the other day who said, hey, you know what? I know my security teams and my IT teams care about this stuff, but they're moving so fast. I almost can't trust them to clean up after themselves. They're doing things so fast. So what I need an automated solution to do that for me that cleans up, policy violations and the like. So I think that automated and continuous part is super important, because I sensed, Tim, this stuff, you don't clean it up and then you're good forever, right?
Absolutely not. This is you can do it once and clean it up if your administrators promise and pinky swear that they're never going to do anything that is going to leave that residual data out there. And we know that's not going to happen. And this is why it needs to be continuous. As the network is being administered, as new endpoints are being brought online, as new technology is being introduced, we need to have that cleaning capability, and it needs to be automated in this way.
Right.
I suppose the question of, that's great, but this is supposed to be about ransomware. Why is this viable to ransomware? We sometimes miss that, just sort of expecting that everybody's seeing the same things that we've seen with ransomware. And that is, we run pretty much every new strain of ransomware against Illusive to see what it does, what a threat actor's doing. And everyone that I've ever seen is using these credentials, and it's using these connections and these pathways to try and move around. I, as red teamers, pen testers, all of those things that we've seen, you never land on where you want to end up. I have never, ever managed to fish a machine that happened to have all the backups on it. That would be very bad, and you've probably got more problems than even Illusive can solve if you're web browsing from your backup solution. But you end up on the first one, you find local admin, you find users who've been logged in, you move around, and this is where, as we saw previously, there was a way to move. That's how we start moving around. And by cleaning that up, it makes it so much more difficult, not just for, as we said, the red team that we keep losing to, but also for that automated software to be able to move around the network and encrypt the things that you care about.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. All right, let's roll to the next slide and talk a little bit more about lateral movement. And I mean, kind of, we talked about this a little earlier, right? So attackers are leveraging our red team tools. And, one of the other things that I think is pretty interesting is attackers really don't encounter anything unexpected. They really don't. Our tools are defensive in nature, and they know how they respond. There's nothing that kind of presents them with anything unexpected. So, kind of talk us through that and kind of show us what the product can do there.
Absolutely. So, somewhere up here. If we start to look at what we can do from the detection of both ransomware and threat actors, malware, APTs, all of these things that we've kind of said, you know what, we should still not bucket these things together, but if we can stop one, we should be able to stop the other. And if we can stop this lateral movement and moving throughout the network, then that's how we're going to be able to catch this ransomware. And the tools that the red team are using, this is where we start to put things in place. And if I just show you some machines, let's have a look at some machines with and without Illusive. If I show you what this looks like without Illusive, this is a fairly simple, this is a tool which is written by us just to be able to show what red teamers do. It's really just a front-end interface. We're going to look at, can we take credentials? As you see all these things up here. So whether it's going to be PuTTY, SCP, we're going to take things out of memory, all the things that a red team's going to do, all the thing that we also see that ransomware does as well. And we've run these ransomware programs, and I can show you some of these that it actually does try and move throughout the network. And we see straight away, I found this user, I found their password, I found this server, and if I want to, I could go and connect to that. And that's how I can start to laterally move throughout the network. That's how I can move and go completely undetected. I'm sure everyone has the best sim in the world out there, and you're taking logs from absolutely every endpoint, and every window is a log. But we all know we're already inundated. If anyone is currently sat there saying, you know what, I think I've got too many people in my SOC. They're all sat about lollygagging, not actually doing anything. Then hats off to you. You must be doing something incredible with SOAR, or you've managed to automate people. So most people are saying, you know what, let's turn off things like failed logins. Let's turn off some of these alerts that just say that someone forgot their password. And that means that threat actors can start moving around, because they can take these credentials and they can move around. And if they do get an access is denied or an error message, it's just lost in the sea of stuff that happens. Yeah. And that's how attackers can be right pretty much every time. And if they're not right, it doesn't matter. If we compare that to a machine, exactly the same machine, as you can see, it's got the same background, it's the same tool. Literally the only difference is this machine's got Illusive in its security stack. And this is how we can start to have these lateral movements that don't go undetected. Because we have so much more information here, but these are deceptions. And every single endpoint is going to be slightly different. So they're going to have different sets of credentials for different services through, I'm not going to say the magic of Illusive, because that makes it sound like smoke and mirrors, but through the incredible hard work of our R&D team to make sure that we have this fantastic efficacy. And if someone does try and use these, you tried the same kind of thing and said, hey, look, I found this user and I found this server. We could do that same thing and say, I'm just going to try and web browse to it. See if it'll take it. There we go. But when that happens, the attacker gets that same kind of access is denied error message. There's no big bells and whistles that appear on the screen, but in the back end, Illusive has now detected this. And this is where those red teaming tools that tell them every time this is going to work. These credentials are going to work because they worked for the past 500 tests that you've done. And these servers should work because they've worked for the past 500 tests that you've done. Or your piece of malware is hard-coded to say, I'm going to use these. When you actually try and use those, when ransomware tries to use these to move laterally, actually, that's where we detect. And through that deterministic approach, we know we can be right because we know something's actually happened here. And that's where it pulls into the next piece of making sure that we've got this timely data. So I will show you as we talk through it and how the next piece of the puzzle comes into it, how we can show that as well. When it's very easy within the Illusive interface for us to be able to create these deceptive servers and create these deceptive users and push these deceptions in all these different ways to the endpoint, meaning whatever tooling it is that the threat actor's using, hey, whether they're going to be using ransomware that's doing encryption, whether they're going to be stealing credentials from browsers, not even someone who's managed to necessarily gain access to a beachhead and they've got system on a box and they're doing that traditional moving. But we've seen some really clever browser techniques recently whereby people, even without escaping the sandbox, have got access to credentials from within the browser. If that's the TTPs that threat actors are moving to, that's where Illusive's already got deceptions. And that's how we can still deterministically catch these threat actors. So whatever the TTPs are, that's where we're going to have these deceptions. And with that agentless approach, we can push it out and turn red teamers' tools against them. Things that they think are going to work, actually, they're not going to work. And it's the thing that's going to catch them out in the end.
So what you're saying here, Tim, and we've got a question, and I'll kind of work our way around to it, is that kind of in addition to the credential and connection information that is on an endpoint, we're pushing additional authentic stories and credentials and connection information to the endpoint as well. So when the attacker harvests those credentials, they get false credentials, but the tools don't know that they're false. And so they look real because they look real, right? They're authentic. We've done a good job of planting them and doing in the right way, using the environment's namespace and all those things. And then when they try to use them, we know. Is that kind of what we're kind of sum it all up?
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're saying here. It's we can turn the attacker's tools against them. In terms of where Illusive fits within the security stack and what else is available, I was having a conversation actually with a journalist yesterday, and we're talking about difference between pen testers and hackers and what takes up time. And I kind of tongue-in-cheek almost said, the difference between a pen tester and a hacker is that you have to write a report at the end of it. But if we look at the amount of time that's spent exploiting, using those 0 days we spoke about and trying to move, actually around 80% of the time is reconnaissance. It is not just reconnaissance of what credentials have I got and where can I move to, but also what EDR is on this box, what firewall rules are in place, what does this stack look like for me to be able to go away and find a bypass or wait for an exploit or whatever it might be. And that's where Illusive really has this differentiator of, you're not going to find Illusive on that endpoint. Your tools are going to tell you that everything should work, but actually we've turned them against you. And when you try and use them, that's where we're going to alert, and that's where we're going to be able to stop those ransomware processors. So the boxes that I just showed you, they don't have EDR, they do have EPP, they do have firewalls, they do have all sorts of monitoring in place, but there aren't really any tools out there, well, that's going to tell you a user did what a user was supposed to do and what they've done for the past year. Yeah. So if a user every day goes and logs into Salesforce or logs into Tanium, nothing's going to tell you that anything happened there that was supposed to be bad or negative. But if a threat actor does that and they find these credentials, then we're going to be able to alert there.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of what Christian was getting to, and his question is, okay, so if I have secure, are there security controls on those systems he showed? And if I had security controls, would they stop it? If I had EDR, would they stop it? And I think the answer is yes and no, or yes or no, right? You don't really know. The kind of core of this is, why wouldn't we want to make it even harder on the attacker? Why wouldn't we want to throw something at them that was deceptive and misleading and cause them to doubt their tools and potentially just go someplace else because this is too hard, right? So I think that's kind of the message, right?
Yeah, and I hear this quite a lot from security teams. And when we start talking about lateral movement and they understand how we're moving into this space of between machines, and as we've been doing this for so much time, I always think, oh, lateral movement, we go back to all these textbooks that I've got, but not everybody wants to do that. So are there some good resources out there available to understand what attackers are doing and how this lateral movement's happening? Have you seen anything particularly good, Jeff?
There's just a lot of good online resources, right? I mean, a lot of the leading security vendors are doing a good job, right? So we see a lot of good data coming out of FireEye, a lot of good data coming out of Microsoft, Sophos, others, right? And so there's a lot of good data, I think that's out there and available. I read that all the time. So that's where I would point people.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So maybe jump ahead, kind of this timely data issue. It's when something bad happens, right? You want access to data, and I want timely access to data. I think one of the things also is that attackers do leverage the noise. I wonder if many times, when we have our alarms that go off and everything, bubbles up to the SEM and there's a whole bunch of activity, and it's almost like everybody goes to look at it. The attackers did that on purpose, right? So, they're deceiving as well. I know how these systems are going to respond. I know that if I do this, it's going to set off alarms. And I actually want to, because I'm hiding the things I'm doing. And then, kind of another part of this is we don't always understand the attacker's intent. So, but if we kind of bring this all full circle and we say, hey, we need, when something happens, what I want point of attack data, what's going on right now on that host, right? I don't want to have to go cobble together the data from my SEM and my NDR and my, and try and figure it out. I want point of attack view of the data to kind of start to answer these questions.
Absolutely. And that's really where the next part of Illusive and where our forensics was born from. Jeff, you and I were on a conversation with our CEO fairly recently. We were talking about our forensics, and he said something which was quite stark, or I thought it was very interesting. Of, you know what, there are EDR tools, there are tools that have better forensics than us. You can do dead box forensics, and as you'll see, that will give you more information. But what people really want, I'm going to say, when the rubber hits the road, when there's actually an incident, when something's happening, is that attack data where I need to say, okay, is this real or not? Is this something that's I need to go and investigate further? And with the speed of machines nowadays, we need to be able to do that incredibly quickly, because if you leave ransomware in a network for an hour, it could have encrypted thousands of boxes. And that's really where our forensics comes into it. So if I actually go in and show you what our forensics look like. So someone triggers one of these deceptions. As we just saw here on this machine, we triggered something. That's where we can come and we can look at these incidents. And if I just show you this top incident that we have, real incident, real time, something that's happened. This is where we straight away can say, okay, so what was it? This was ransomware. It is a ransomware webinar after all. Let's talk about ransomware. We've seen that they managed to move laterally. We can see how many hops they were. We can see what it was that they were trying to do. And by having ASM on here, we've actually cleared a lot of that up, and they weren't able to move any further. Although we can see in some of the other incidents before it got to ransomware that they did hit a deception, and we may be able to see, hey, look, they managed to move to a deceptive share. And we've also got all of that rich information for that too. But very quickly, things that when we talk to SOC analysts, what is it that you want to be able to see straight away? I want a desktop screenshot to be able to see, was it that user logged in? Can I see that actually they've just searched for something and it's gone off to a deception? And I might want to have a word with that user about why you're digging through shares, but I can't see Mimikatz on their endpoint, or vice versa. Hey, look, I can see Mimikatz running on that endpoint. I can see credentials that have been discovered. I can see all of this rich information, and straight away, there's a reason that they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and there's a reason that we included the desktop screenshot, because it does enable you to make that decision. I also want to see things like, what's my command prompt history? Can I see something that's happened that wasn't an interactive shell? Same thing with PowerShell. Can I see my startup processes? And very quickly, we can triage from here. And yes, EDR might give you more in depth than this, but this really enables people to make decisions. And we can drill down deeper within Illusive, as you would expect, but we're always adding more to what we can do. And we can start to see that ransomware event, and we can see what does the Windows event log look like from here. We can see what were the network connections. We can see what were programs installed. So all of this great information if we did want to do root cause analysis. But most of the time, when we're looking at incident response, this is the information that you need. And we can actually have Illusive integrate into other products, whereby SOARs or SIEMs can call our forensics and pull all of that back. So it really does give you timely access to this attacker data. And again, without that agent. So we will pick up more things, such as those kind of incidents where we're going to see real things happening. We'll be able to see, if I open some of these incidents that we have, and this was actually triggered from Defender for Endpoint, but here we can see a user, we can see a threat actor. This is what they were doing. We can see that they ran advanced IP scanner. And then if I actually go into my command prompt history, I can see that some of their TTPs is that they will run PowerShell and they'll start an incognito Chrome for advanced IP scanner. So if I want to investigate this further into the network, I could take this and go and run that through my SIEM and say, show me anywhere else where Chrome might have run as incognito. And this tells you what the TTPs are going to be doing. After all that reconnaissance has been done, I would hate to be a pen tester or a red teamer coming up against Illusive. And that's, I think, what Alyssa found out if you've seen some of our previous webinars of, I thought that I'd bypassed all of the EDR. I thought that I'd figured out what this network looks like, and then it didn't work and I got caught. Yeah. And you end up thinking, well, what the hell? And you may feel miffed as a red team, you may feel miffed as a pen tester, but aren't we all really here to actually protect our networks? And that's really what we're doing here. We enable that to really happen.
So let me double click a little bit here, Tim, and let me ask you, I mean, I know the answer to the question, obviously, but these are the questions that I had when I joined the company. So this information is on demand, right? So when an alert surfaces because somebody hit a deceptive element, this happens quickly. Is that right? And absolutely. Maybe describe how it works and a little bit, because I think that's super important.
Absolutely, and it really is super important about how that works. And this is when Illusive triggers, when there is an incident, and an incident is because a threat actor has really used one of our deceptions. It's not machine learning, it's not artificial intelligence, it's a threat actor has really used a deception. We've used something that we've pushed onto that endpoint. If we come into here, we've used these credentials in memory, we've used these. That's when we'll end up with an incident in Illusive. And that's when Illusive will then push our forensics. And again, we'll push with something like Intune or Landesk or whatever technologies are already in place for a very easy implementation and very low overhead. And we push our executable. Our executable will collect all of this fantastic information and then pull it back into the management server. So without the threat actor or red teamer knowing anything's going on, we've pulled back all of that information, and it is that machine actually used a deception, therefore let's go and push our forensics binary onto there. So it's not a really convoluted set of steps on how we push our forensics or how we get this information. It's very much this deterministic alert, incredibly powerful, timely forensics. And this is within milliseconds or seconds that we're going to be potentially pulling this data back.
Okay, very, very cool. But so you mentioned you can trigger this with automated tools like a SOAR, right? Is that?
Absolutely. So everything that I've just shown you, if you didn't want to do this through the web interface, if you just wanted to do this command line, there's a fully functional REST API for Illusive, and you can go and trigger incidents, you can go and clean out endpoints, everything I've shown you. It wouldn't be quite as pretty webinar if we just sat here in Postman and I went, oh, and then I'm going to do this. And you can see the JSON response and everyone understood that, right? But yes, absolutely. And we have people who have integrated Illusive into not just their technology stack, but also their internal playbooks. So whenever there's an incident from anything, let's go and get that timely forensics. Let's go and get that fantastic data that shows us exactly what's happened.
Yeah, because when I first saw this, I thought, great. So this, if a deception is triggered, this is great information. But there's a whole bunch of alerts that I get from my other infrastructure that I would want this same information. So with the integration with SOAR, we can kind of wire that in, right? So this can come back for any alert that the SOC has, right?
Absolutely, and that's why we built that integration, because we had clients screaming at us saying, it's great when there's an Illusive alert, but what happens when there's a firewall alert? Or I've seen something from DLP was something that we built whereby when we saw files going out of the network, let's run our forensics and see what that process looks like. So because of our client's requests, that's where we took the product, and we can call this from our REST API.
Cool. All right, well, let's roll to the last couple slides, and a couple other questions we can walk through, but so there's a lot of different attack techniques. And there are things that Illusive Active Defense does that are countermeasures for those attack techniques. So we just tried to provide a reference list here of some of those things. Concerned about LSAS memory dump, the Windows credential deceptions that you saw Tim put in that, in that demo. All those additional credentials show up when we scrape memory, and those are deceptive and will trip the attacker up. So it just gives you a sense of kind of the breadth of the deceptions and the benefits of the hygiene process. So Tim, let's roll to the next slide and just kind of wrap it up. Got a couple questions and try to not push people into their next meeting. So try to provide some guidance, right? Which is, hey, I've got a current situation in my infrastructure, and maybe the attacker's in and maybe they're not. What do I do? And so we have this process we've documented called Shake the Tree, and it's really all about reducing ransomware risk. So if we go through the hygiene process and we eliminate that low-hanging fruit for the attacker, so let's reduce those credentials that are laying around that the attacker leverages. Let's make sure we've got lateral movement strategy in place, right? And there's no single technology here. We certainly believe we bring a lot to the party. We can help a lot of environments, as you can see, make it hard on the attacker to move laterally. Where you can, reset privileged account passwords. We realize you can't do that everywhere, but where you can, reset them, and then monitor for lateral movement. The idea here is if an attacker's inside and they've harvested some passwords and some credentials that are useful, if we reset them, then they've got to find more, right? And now if we're kind of watching and we've got a lateral movement detection strategy, we can kind of force their movement and detect them. So that's kind of a methodology that we've developed to help there. Any thoughts, Tim?
My first thought is I should probably take myself back off mute while I'm still talking. We must be getting towards the end of the pandemic.
We are.
Now.
This is it, yeah.
I'm really hoping I don't have to say that too many times and we can start to do things in person as well. The only thing I'll say is that this is tried and tested. We have had clients who have been hit by ransomware before Illusive's gone in, or as we're implementing. Isn't it always funny how when people start to see security tools being implemented, suddenly it really ramps up the threat actors? And we've seen these, and we do know that this does work, and that credentials and these privileged accounts are what people are using for both ransomware and for APTs. So this is only the start of it as well. There is much more to go into it, and an awful lot of ways that we can help, we as Illusive and we as thought leaders as well, reducing that ransomware risk and helping organizations to improve their security.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's roll to the last slide. We got a little information, and then we'll bounce around a couple questions. So, we encourage you to read our blogs, follow us. There's some interesting content. One of the things that Illusive is really trying to do is kind of change the way we share information with all of you. We have a View from the Attacker series where we brought in an ethical hacker to go up against the Illusive Active Defense system, and it's quite interesting to watch what she does and how she responds. There's 2 parts to the series. So the View from the Attacker, this experience, kind of Illusive Unplugged, we're really trying to make sure we're connecting, and delivering information in the right way. And so that's kind of what these series are all about. There was a question that came in, Tim, about, researching Zero Trust, right? So Zero Trust is all over the news. And they asked, how does this compare to Zero Trust, right? Because Zero Trust, we think about that process as helping us with lateral movement.
Absolutely. And Zero Trust is a great place to go to, and a great place that some of the best security organizations out there that we're working with are adopting. There's 2 things with Zero Trust where we can help. The first is it's an incredibly long and complicated and difficult process getting to that to that zero trust state. And it means that you could be 4, 5, 6 years before you've actually got that implemented, and you're still vulnerable for that amount of time. And something which is as low lift as Illusive really can help with that, which I know it feels a bit like sticking plasters over gaping wounds, but it's definitely something where we can really help with there. The second part about zero trust is great, but you still have to use privileged accounts at some point. People are still going to have to log on to domain controllers. You're still going to have to get somewhere at some point. You're still going to have to, even if it's all single sign-on and it's all based off of your Windows Hello or whatever it might be, eventually you're going to have to use, whether it's tokens, whether it's whatever it might be, to log into systems. And threat actors are still going to exploit that. And that's where Illusive is coming into it as well. So why don't we start to have these tokens as deceptions? And why don't we still have this kind of alerting that we know that we're missing, because we're seeing it from pen testing reports. Even within zero trust networks, we can still really bolster this and help with, again, we're going to say where the rubber is hitting the road with these credentials and with these accounts.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to an industry analyst from one of the leading firms the other day, and we were talking about zero trust and active defense. And he said, you know, they're actually different sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. They're very common missions, right? The philosophies are the same, right? Assume breach are part of, you know, the center to both philosophies. And you can look at zero trust as always verify. Mm-hmm. I mean, what we're doing with deceptions and the hygiene piece is almost verifying trustworthiness, right? If somebody, we see a lot of crimes of opportunity, a lot of movement laterally, and by putting those deceptions in place and ensuring the hygiene, you're actually achieving the same mission. And it's almost like a pragmatic path to, you know, to attaining zero trust, because it is a process. Mapping who connects to what, when, how, at a detailed level in a large organization is a heavy lift, right? A lot of good work there, but you know, they kind of have very common themes. We have a question. How can we leverage Illusive to contain ransomware immediately to reduce risk? Yeah, you know, hopefully what we've taken away from the session, and I'll let you chime in, you know, Tim, and you can probably bounce to the product a little bit, right? Is that hygiene and those deceptions that make lateral movement very difficult. If you get that in place, you know, then, you know, clearly, you know, the idea for reducing the risk of ransomware is quick detection of the attacker inside, right? We have to accelerate that detection. They can't stay there for days and weeks and months. So tripping them up should accelerate that, and we've seen that. So
absolutely. I don't think we showed quite this bit within the portal, but we are stopping the ransomware. And I may have just missed this bit, but if you see that ransomware process that started encrypting files, actually we blocked that. That process is now suspended. So we were not just alerting and saying, hey, there's ransomware that's encrypting files on your network. As our last step, once we've stopped that lateral movement, once we've identified the ransomware trying to move around, if it does try and encrypt, Illusive does have the ability to block or suspend those ransomware processes. So we will actually stop that within the platform.
Yeah, it's kind of I think it's fair to say it's containing your blast radius, right? Your backups and everything can recover from a few systems being encrypted, right? But if you have 1,000 systems encrypted, you know, that's a oh no moment, right? So we're going to have to, you know, that's a bigger deal. So, you know, I think our functionality around a ransomware deception and then redirecting the encryption to a swamp file and tying up the encryption and the like is mitigates that risk, right? And just kind of tries to limit the exposure. Is that fair?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah. So there's another question. Can Illusive detect 0 days, such as Hafnium, SolarWinds, vulnerability exploitation on the day when the 0 day is declared? declared probably. Yeah, that's, I'd love to say we're the silver bullet for everything, but, stopping that 0 day isn't our thing, right? It's once that 0 day has happened, the breach has occurred, persistence is established, then that's where we come in, for the lateral movement. So there's other, obviously other systems for the 0 days. Anything to add, Tim?
Yeah, I think that when we talk assumed breach, we're always thinking of this 0 day approach of 0 days are going to happen. People are going to get access to beachheads to the first part of the network. But if you want to stop that bleed, if you want to make sure, for SolarWinds, for example, if you want it to be that the only machine that gets breached is your SolarWinds machine, and they don't use that as the platform to pivot to the rest of your network, that's where Illusive can really come into it. And although we won't detect the 0 day, the exploit, that buffer overflow, whatever it might be, once they're on that machine and they try and move further through the network, that's exactly where we will detect them. So we will detect the attack, as in the kill chain, but not the 0 day. There are other things that will identify that, but that's not us.
Well, great. So we're at the top of the hour. One of our goals through this was not to take it all the way to the top of the hour, but I guess we've accomplished we've accomplished that. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Comment on social media, provide us feedback. We're always looking to adjust our approach and make sure we're delivering the right information in the right way. And we're going to continue to try new things like this to have a different kind of conversation and make sure we're delivering you what you need. So again, the recording will be posted. You can share it, follow us, talk to us. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to the next time.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.